Working Cows Podcast, episode 319. This episode is brought to you by Zoetis.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the C90 Ocean Minerals Studios. And this episode is brought to you by Zoetis.
I'm holding something in my hands. Hint, it's a tool. Centuries ago, it might have been considered futuristic or super advanced. But now, there's one in every toolbox, and we take it for granted. What is it? It's a hammer. Now, what if I told you that the same practicality and dependability in a hammer is now available in another sort of tool? A tool that you might think is futuristic, but it isn't. It's genetic testing for commercial cattle. It's not theoretical technology, it's proven and useful today. Use it to find heifers who have the potential to be more fertile and stay in your herd longer. Use it to help reach your goals faster and with more confidence. Use it to help make smarter decisions about selection, breeding, and marketing. Use it to help improve the quality and performance of your cattle. Genetic testing is just a tool. Use it to build a better herd. Get started with Zoetis at beefgenetics.com.
Very excited to be joined today by Kate Sabino. Kate is an intern at the Wolfe's Neck Dairy. Wolfe's Neck Dairy is in Maine, and it is in a place about as different from Western South Dakota as you can get. So I look forward to learning in this conversation from her and what she's experiencing there as they've been going through a transition in Wolfe's Neck Dairy from a conventional organic dairy to a grazing dairy. And so there's been some challenges and some hiccups and some decisions that had to be made. And it's just a real good opportunity to kind of capture the full scope of what it takes to lead this kind of change and be on the ground perspective of a day in and day out laborer and somebody who is following the leadership of a former guest of the Working Cows Podcast. Ben Gottschall reached out to me and said she'd be a great one to talk to. So looking forward to this conversation. Kate, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Thanks, Clay. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a huge fan of your show, and I listen to it often while milking or doing chores. So it's really exciting to have the opportunity to be on.
Very excited to have you here as well. Always good to talk to somebody east of the 100th meridian, and you're a long ways east of the 100th meridian. So yeah, just maybe set up a little bit this conversation, kind of describe your actual physical location, where you're at in the world, and then we'll dive into this conversation.
Yeah, so I'm currently in Freeport, Maine. I am a dairy grazing apprentice at Wolfe's Neck Center for Agriculture and the Environment, and we farm right here on the coast. So you're right, we're about as far east as you can get, unless you want to head up to Acadia. Yeah, that's where I am right now. I've been on a lot of dairies, but all throughout the eastern states, and very much in that sort of Eastern conceptualization of what a dairy is and sort of how it's run and what those constituent parts and enterprises that fall underneath it are.
Sure. Yeah. And I think I talked to Ben Gottschall right as he was making that transition to Wolfe's Neck. And I think he was even describing like there's some salt spray onto some of the grass that you're grazing from the ocean and that level of on the coast, right?
Yes. Yeah. When we make hay, we can see Casco Bay from our hay fields. We have to be careful we don't, get too ambitious and accidentally drive the tractor off a rocky cliff into the high tide. So yes, we're very much on the coast. And we're here because this land was turned into a foundation that's dedicated to this kind of work and research. And so we feel really lucky to be proximal to something that's so beautiful and that is becoming increasingly, less accessible.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating perspective for me as somebody who's grown up in the West, and I think it'll be a fascinating perspective as well for a lot of the listeners who are from the West or maybe not as far east as you are. But what we really want to talk to you today about is the transition that Wolfe's Neck has been going through, and I think probably under the leadership of Ben to some degree. He has been, I don't know if I should say instigator, but he's been the one leading this change. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that's a very accurate description. Ben has really been leading the charge and, bringing a lot of his expertise from Nebraska and other places where he's dairied and managed an all grass herd. Ben has been a great mentor and definitely brings a unique perspective to this transition.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that makes your perspective specifically unique, and this will be linked in the show notes page for today, and we'll have a link to the blog post that you wrote there on the Wolfe's Neck Center website. And one of the things that makes your perspective unique is the fact that you were at Wolfe's Neck, and then you went away from Wolfe's Neck while this transition was getting started, and then came back after it had kind of picked up some steam. Do I understand that correctly?
Yep, absolutely. So I started at Wolfe's Neck really in the middle of COVID, while I was also working another role in food and agriculture, in food and agribusiness, and I started really only a few months after that transition began. And then because of, relocation and what I had to do for my other role, I had to pause my apprenticeship and relocate. And then I came back almost exactly a year after. So it was really only 365 days between when I left Wolfe's Neck and when I returned. And some of the changes that I've been able to observe in that short period of time, have been, for me at least, really surprising, especially considering, how I've experienced other transitions, on other dairies. But that's the timeline. It was almost exactly a year between when I left and when I came back in the fall of 2022.
Yeah, and I think before we get too far down this road, we should define what that transition is. What was the state of management at Wolfe's Neck, and then what is it now, and how has that transition been made? From what to what, basically?
Yeah, so Wolfe's Neck Dairy, only started in the mid 20-teens, and it has always been an organic dairy. I guess before that, I should mention that historically, Wolfe's Neck has been a beef farm. So it's got a long legacy and history of having grazing ruminants on this land. But dairy really only entered the picture in the mid 20-teens, if I have my timeline correct. And the management up until that point, I would describe it as what they call, conventional organic. I mean, following organic standards, shipping to Stonyfield, which is a certified organic brand and label. But, mostly working in that conventional framework or mindset of, yes, grazing and getting about, hopefully 30% of their dry matter intake from pasture for, the minimum grazing season, which is 120 days. But beyond that, pretty heavy supplementation with, off-farm imported feed, whether that's, a dry dairy ration that's formulated for us by a local grain company, or, buying in rather expensive alfalfa hay, sometimes even from outside the country. And so that was sort of the model that that the Wolfe's Neck dairy was up until this transition really started in late 20, early 2021. And of course, there, are many other aspects to this transition. We don't really see it just as changing the diet. I mean, that's really, of course, just the very beginning. There are other things I could mention, like, until this transition commenced, I think all of the breeding was AI. The selection pressure was kind of in a different direction, more for production, less for things like components or tight calving intervals. And so, yeah, I would say it was, conventional organic for me really is I think, a pretty accurate descriptor. Pretty much standard, industry standard, but just meeting those organic requirements, if that makes sense.
Sure. And I want to make sure I understood you correctly, because I'm not familiar with the organic standards necessarily. You said 30% of their dry matter intake from grazing during the growing season of 120 days. So are we saying outside of the growing season of 120 days, they don't have to have 30% of their dry matter intake from grazing? Is that right?
Yeah, hopefully, Clay, I don't put myself in hot water here. I don't want to quote the organic standards exactly, or I'm trying to, but I'm pretty sure, yes, for organic that's not certified grass-fed, I think the grazing season is 120 days, and I think 30% dry matter intake is that minimum threshold you have to hit for those 120 days. I think it was kind of managed as that. I think the key word is probably minimum, less so the time frame or the percent, but just like we were trying to reach this threshold. We put the cows out on pasture, even if they're being moved twice a day, it's the management, from what I understood or from what I observed when I was here earlier, was really like the bulk of their nutrition is not coming from the pasture, the acreage that we have here. I think the key word in that is probably minimum.
Sure. And now the transition is to 100% grass fed, or what percentage, or a larger percentage? Where are you at now?
Yeah. So, and Ben and I actually talk about this all the time. It's like, we don't really have a great language or a succinct language to describe this yet. I guess the phrase that most folks would probably be familiar with, and that at this point is the most technically accurate, is to say 100% grass fed. But again, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. In terms of low input and animal performance, and milk quality. I've certainly seen herds that I suppose technically are 100% grass fed, but that are not, performing in the way that this more holistic program that we're trying to execute, is aiming for. But yes, I would say we are aiming to be 100% grass fed. In the past 2 years, I think it is now probably more like a year and a half, given when I wrote that and the point in time I was referencing when I wrote that article. But we've cut the grain ration for this herd in half. Mm-hmm. And it's also been really remarkable to see the improvement in forage quality in just that short period of time. That doesn't mean, of course it's not 1-to-1. That doesn't mean we're halfway there. There's sort of this multi-stage, multi-year process that we have charted, and then really, Ben has taken the lead on. And, I think what's really effective here, or what's really working here, is that we really move through that as a team, and we spend a lot of time checking in and asking ourselves, like, okay, what progress or what changes are we seeing, and is that what we want to see? Is that too fast? Is that not enough? Is that a rate of change that's viable given the other factors that we have to consider? And sorry, that was a really long answer to your question, but I feel like it's worth addressing that. On one hand, yes, I think we are trying to be 100% grass fed, but really not just with the end of of being certified as that necessarily. I mean, there is no grass-fed market here in Maine unless you're going to, direct market, but there's no truck that comes here to pick up 100% grass-fed milk. So it's really beyond that. And it's not really something that we see as being terminal. I don't think there's going to be a point in time when we're going to say that we've done it, and that we can kind of rest on our laurels, or that, mission accomplished. I think it's kind of an enduring process.
Right. Well, and I think that, like you said, it's not a one-to-one. The first half or the second half won't be as easy as the first half, right? I mean, and that's agriculture, that's sound quality and podcasting. It's everything in life is there's a low barrier to entry, and you get a big return for that, crossing that barrier. And then everything beyond that gets exponentially more expensive and harder to do. So, I mean, it becomes is that kind of along the lines of what you're talking about there with that not being a one-to-one transition process?
Yeah, certainly. And yeah, I mean, we're still right now, I mean, we are starting to apply some selection pressures. You could certainly say we are reducing that grain, and we're but we're still really monitoring and seeing how cows perform. I mean, the saying, I know it's been written a lot and said a lot, you got to just take the crutch out. And I mean, we're not really in a position to just kick the crutch out from everybody and cull everybody who doesn't perform yet. I mean, we're really still in, what Ben calls stage one, and we're trying to build this genetic baseline of cows that do have, the genetic ability to perform in the conditions we would like. And so, yeah, we're definitely starting to apply that pressure, but we're going to have to apply that pressure a lot harder in the next 3 years. And I think, that can be a really exciting time. It can also be a really challenging time. It's kind of like, I like to think of it as like if you can picture a succession curve, like as something, that sigmoidal succession curve that ecology likes to move through, I feel like that's also kind of what the learning curve looks like. And right now, we're probably just at that like first inflection point on the bottom. And that steeper piece is where, a lot of change can happen really quickly is probably, not too far in the future, but we're not quite in that just yet. But I'm really excited for it, especially given, how this team and how the leadership of this dairy and of the organization has been supporting this transition.
Yeah, and definitely want to talk about a lot of that, about the team aspect of this whole venture. But a couple of things before we move on to that is, I think that one of the interesting things about a dairy is, I've heard it said that you have a report card every day or twice a day. You've got that bulk tank there, and you can kind of examine what's in it, how much, what kind of quality is it, all those things. Do you think that plays a role in helping this transition, or helping you make decisions and see the immediate effects of those transitions?
It does. Yeah, that's actually something that, especially this time of year, milk production is something we consider pretty heavily in terms of how we apply selection pressure. So at this point in time, this is another change that is very significant from when I originally, paused my apprenticeship and came back. When I first left, it was year-round calving. And so our milk supply was relatively steady from January to June back to December. And now we are strictly spring and fall calving, which works great from, a grazing and cow health and calf health perspective. But we do have, we're still shipping milk to Stonyfield. We still have a customer that, has certain expectations that we are obligated to meet. And so, yes, we are absolutely considering, our milk supply and our milk yield on a daily basis. when we are thinking about, do we decrease, do we apply a little more pressure, and do we see how the cows perform with less grain? I mean, they might be, maybe they're more efficient, maybe they're producing more milk per pound of grain that we feed, but if that total is not where we need it to be, that is still a very significant number. And so that is absolutely something we manage for. That I feel like that really falls more into the customer relation end of things, but is certainly just as important as as anything else in this. But yes, I mean, not only do we have the milk volume in the tank, but I mean, our milk is tested every pickup. So I mean, we can really obsess over whatever we want, MUNs, butter, fat, protein, somatic cell. I mean, you can, I guess the saying goes, what gets measured gets managed. And I feel like on dairies, actually, we're overwhelmed with data. And that adage is becoming a little bit obsolete as we become more and more automated and have more and more technology to capture information. And we do use it. I mean, we spend a lot of time reviewing numbers as a team and asking ourselves hard questions and trying to go back and understand the numbers better, differently. But that's something that I at least recognize, and I think everybody here also recognizes kind of what is special about a place like this. We've got a lot of folks who are able to do that, and able to devote that time and energy to really drilling down into the numbers. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely. That report card or that grade is something we consider very heavily, especially this time of year.
Do you can you give me an example of something that you would get back in the form of data that has influenced a decision, or you've used it to measure the success of a decision? Could you give me an example of something like that?
I mean, I think the thing that comes to mind most immediately is milk volume, or at least that's really kind of what we're trying to balance right now. Like we would love to, I think we see potential for more efficient production of milk per pound of grain, but because so many cows are drying off right now, and there is a minimum milk weight that we have to have in the tank for a pickup, we actually have to resist the temptation, maybe not to push that as hard. But as we've scaled back, as we really track our income over feed cost, week by week, and we've really seen, as far as I can recall, while I've been here, and as I've been in attendance at those meetings, I think we've only seen positive impact to our income over feed cost as we've reduced our grain as fed. But it's, we still have, if you have to meet that minimum volume in the tank, it might mean you have to produce milk less efficiently and feed more grain just to get there. And that's really just, that's just this very specific time of year between like July 15th and August 21st. I mean, pretty soon we're going to have all of our fall cows calving in, and we'll be right back up to where we were, hopefully in, April, May, June. But it's just this kind of tight window that we're in right now. But yeah, I would say that's really, that is the data point that we are constantly monitoring, income over feed costs, what we're feeding cows and what our production is, not just on a bulk tank basis, but on an individual cow basis. We can get individual cow data twice a day. They have, transponders, and, that information goes through the parlor into the computer system. But yeah, I would say that's consistently the information that drives decisions the most often.
Sure. So can the actual fleshing out of that is on the day-to-day, is it more of an impact on what they're actually getting from a grazing perspective, or more of an impact of what they're getting from a supplement perspective?
Could you maybe say more?
So how does your bulk tank weight translate to tomorrow are we going to give them more grain or more grass, or how, is that how that's happening, or is that one of the ways that you're solving that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way we graze is really, I would say, driven more by, what the pasture needs than trying to put the best quality forage in front of the cows. And I have to say, again, another thing that's been really amazing to see is just the dramatic improvement in forage quality in the last 2 years. Like I would say, all of our pastures have very good quality forage in them. Especially Ben coming from Nebraska is like, you guys need to stop complaining about your quality of forage and not having enough, because, come out to Nebraska and it's a little different. But I mean, so like I'll do I'll take a pasture inventory once a week, and I will make the grazing plan based on the cow days per acre, the pounds of dry matter that I'm estimating in those pastures, and also, the recovery rate and what kind of, how fast I think we should be moving through our rotation. I mean, right now things are kind of slowing down a bit as things have been hotter. Thankfully, it hasn't been dry, but I'm not going to. We're not accelerating, the herd through the pastures to allow them to be selective, or, to try and fill in any nutritional gaps. I mean, the pastures are what the pastures are. The grain ration is what the grain ration is. And the question is, can that animal perform on what we're giving her, which we think is pretty good. And so, I mean, I don't think we've ever come up against a question of like, oh gosh, do we change our grazing rotation to meet nutritional needs? Also, because I think the way we're grazing right now also puts the best grass that we currently have in front of that animal. I mean, we graze what's most recovered and what's most ready, not necessarily, what has the most days of rest. We're not just going on a set rotation. It's something we're monitoring very closely week by week. But yeah, I would say grazing is not a lever that we're kind of pulling to make up to fill any gaps. That kind of is what it is. And they move to a new paddock every 12 hours. So they're on grass really as much as possible.
Right. Yeah, I think what you're describing is what Daniel Suarez called rational grazing, which I think is actually a term from, I'm going to forget the name of the French guy who
Andre Voisin.
Yeah, Voisin. Yeah. So he called it rational grazing, and everybody thinks, oh, you just mispronounced rotational grazing. No, it's rational grazing. You're going to where what's ready now, or what's the like you said, what's the most ready, what's the most recovered, not necessarily what's been rested the longest. And so I think that's a good thing. And I think that's probably part of the reason why, as you said, and what you said, the dramatic improvement in that 365-day window from when you were there to when you came back. That's part of the reason why that happened. If I had to guess, it'd be part of the reason anyways.
Yeah, I think so. And, I think we like to talk. I do certainly like to talk a lot about soil and grass and cows. And, I could obsess over that forever. But sometimes the other important ingredients are just like, time and people. Like it's not just a formula of like, okay, here's the set rotation. Let's just move through it. Everybody, who works here for the summer is going to learn how to set this up in a week, and then we can forget about it. It means that, we devote a lot of time to monitoring that and talking about it and changing things if we have to. But we, I think we make space for that, and we make sure it's a priority. And there are other changes that have happened in this herd that have given that space and that time. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's where I'd like to go, is kind of talking about the changes in the herd, and then we'll talk about the people and the teamwork. So we'll cover all the bases here today for grass, money, cows, and people. But Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Zoetis.
Let's talk about tools for a minute. Take these pliers. There's not much I can do to convince you that pliers are futuristic or revolutionary. Even if I added sound effects and said,
Pliers, the future of tool technology.
You still wouldn't think of pliers as anything but reliable and dependable. In fact, there's probably one hanging from your belt. Now let's talk about another tool. One that you might think is futuristic, but isn't. Genetic testing for commercial cattle. It's not theoretical technology. It's proven and valuable today. It's a tool that can help you make smarter decisions about selection, breeding, and marketing. Use it to find heifers who have the potential to be more fertile and stay in your herd longer. Use it to help reach your goals faster and with more confidence. Genetic testing is just a tool. Use it to build a better herd. Get started with Zoetis at beefgenetics.com.
You mentioned in the article that the first time or when you saw them turned out, they would only graze if the weather was perfect, and now they're willingly walking out and going out and foraging and finding their own feedstuffs. So I guess my question is, do you have a sense of whether that change was a result of a stockmanship change or the result of a genetic change? And I don't think that the genetics have been there hasn't been a wholesale turnover in the actual population of the cattle there. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes. The first heifer that was born and sired by grass-fed genetics is going to calve in September. So we haven't even really started to see the impacts of the breeding program that was started a couple years ago yet. It's a good question if it's a stockmanship thing or if it's a genetic thing. I think probably the most significant contributing factor is simply that, and this kind of dovetails with both, is that they know that there's not a bowl full of candy waiting for them in the barn. I mean, some of those cows were getting like 15, 16 pounds of grain a day, sometimes even upwards of that. And, it's hard to go eat a salad when you filled up on ice cream at 8 a.m. and you're going to get ice cream again at 3. So, I mean, I know that's the analogy everybody likes to use. It's been said a lot of times before, but I think really that's what it is that this is the food source that we have made available. And I think they have, that has kind of been, as Ben likes to say, imprinted on them. They understand that this is what they will be to eat. And they have been trained out of simply coming to the barn when they are hungry. But I mean, I think we've also removed cows that really couldn't do that and really couldn't graze for a number of reasons. I mean, whether that was behavioral or lameness or lack of heat tolerance. Not that we really have a high heat. It's hard for us to really get into the heat stress index here. I mean, I think it's broken 90 degrees like twice this summer.
But you have this thing that we don't have in Western South Dakota called humidity. So that makes a difference.
That will kind of, that can make up for our lack of temperature. But yeah, I think there's also been, there's been culling and there's been some refinement of the genetics in the herd just from cows that really couldn't do it in a fundamental way.
But I would expect that fallout would be a lot higher. And maybe I'm mistaken. What kind of cows are these?
So the profile of the herd that was here when I started back in March of 21 was very heavily Holstein, very large. I would say like very tall and very dairy, like not a very sturdy cow, but usually a wide cow. a big cow, like a cow that really needed to eat a lot to sustain herself. And it was also kind of a pastiche of different, cows that were brought in from different herds. And there was not really like, from what I could observe, like a breeding program at the time that was really providing a North Star or like guiding the selection of traits in any direction other than perhaps just like milk production. And so, yeah, I would say it was diverse in some ways, but not in ways that are helpful or supportive in getting cows that can really perform on grass. Unfocused maybe is a better word to describe
Sure.
What the program was previously.
Well, yeah. So, but my guess would be that the fallout would be higher. Has there been a big change as far as the actual cows that are there? Has there been a lot that have left and a lot that have come in to replace them that were more selected for that grazing type of an animal?
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. There absolutely was. I think there may have even been the biggest fallout prior to my arrival at Wolfe's Neck. So really within the first like 5 months of when this program started to happen and really take root, I think a lot of cows were shipped in that period. And then, yeah, I mean, I have seen, the cows that I saw leave, and there are quite a few of them, are the cows that I kind of would have expected to. They kind of meet more the description I just gave you. Those taller, bigger Holsteins that, are just, they're for a different type of herd. I mean, they have a purpose. They're for a different type of herd with different management goals. And the cows that have really stayed are usually Jersey crosses, smaller. Some of them are fine boned, but they just they keep their weight on better, or they just don't need as much to achieve that same thing. And yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not denying that there has been some significant attrition. That is absolutely part of it. And yes, there is. You're right. In the earliest stages, I think there was some significant fallout that that article honestly doesn't capture as much of, because I think a lot of it happened right before I started. And a lot of it happened when I was not here. Like, I don't necessarily, I can ask Ben, sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, well, she didn't breed back, or, but those are stories that I wasn't really here for. I just came back, and the cows that I remembered always grazed when it was a little hotter, and would kind of lead the herd back out onto pasture are still kicking. And, the ones that honestly would make me scream and yell trying to get them out of the barn, they're not here. But yeah, I don't want to discount that question. There absolutely has been some heavy culling as well.
Sure. But so it answers one question, but it creates another. It answers the question of, was it stockmanship or genetics? It was probably some of both. Like you said, the answer is probably yes, but it was probably a lot of that just being willing to cull. But then that creates another question of, how do you get buy-in? Who is signing the checks at Wolfe's Neck? And who is there a board that is reported to for this foundation that you have to make, if you have to give answers to, and said, these are the feed costs, this is the income, these are the culls, these are the purchases, and so there becomes that, as you said earlier, there becomes that human relations perspective of this thing, not to mention the actual labor side of it, and the people who probably have sentimental attachments to some cows, or at least maybe even a style of management, and you've got to be able to navigate that transition too. So, I mean, I think those are kind of where we get to this people management side of it, and kind of what has been your perspective on some of those transitions and how they've been handled.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And, there are Wolf's Neck it is an organization with a board that we have to report to. And, of course, there's also a leadership team and other departments that we share resources with. And then we're a very public facing organization as well. So, I mean, we get questions from all sides, and, we have obligations to many different people and other organizations in different ways. I think that there are two things going on that two important forms of buy-in that have been really critical. The first is that, and this is not in order of importance, but the first is that the leadership team at Wolf's Neck really supports this transition and really sees the value of it, and has just been really trusting and interested, and, I hate to use this word again, but truly like supportive of it through, periods where things have felt really successful, and through other periods where, it's been really challenging. Like, there was a pretty severe, well, again, I'm going to get in trouble with Ben, but there was a drought here last summer, and forage availability was very limited. And, I'm sure the temptation was strong to, well, probably not actually given the management that's here, but it would have, it would have been an option to feed more grain in lieu of, our lack of pasture, given that everything went dormant. But that's not what was done. I think that the leadership team's willingness to sort of see this through and trust the expertise that is here on the dairy leadership team is really important. I have worked on other dairies where that really isn't the case, and it's very, very hard, and it really wears the people in the farm management role down very quickly when they feel like they're up against an obstacle, and they actually have they have the ability and they have the option to do something to mitigate that, but they don't necessarily have the backing of the person or the people who are in control of the resources. But that is absolutely not the case here. The second thing, and this is, I think, the hardest thing. This is, I think, the common denominator, or the most common challenge that I've been able to observe on other dairies going through the same process, is everybody on the dairy team, like everybody who is working, cows and, building fence and taking care of animals and dealing with, the consequences of when things don't go according to plan, really also understands the value of this transition. And there's not this, when things maybe don't go as we've planned, the last thing that there is any kind of blaming, finger pointing, like berating. There is just absolutely none of that. And I understand, that on other kinds of farms, if this is your enterprise and this is how you cash flow and the milk in your tank and what you ship is, informs how you feed your family in the next 2 weeks. Like, I understand that stress breeds a lot of that, and that is not always a function of people's character, but there's not any of that at all here. And I think it's because people understand why this is valuable or interesting. They themselves are really drawn to this. We don't like strong arm anybody into loving, this transition. I mean, I think that Ben and Elizabeth do a really good job of sharing why they're interested in it and why they care about it. But, when things do get challenging, we converge, we don't diverge, and we look at what information we have together. Like, multiple perspectives are welcome. They are not a threat to what we're trying to do. And, because we are a research dairy, we do have access to a lot of data, a lot of data tools, and we will look at that and try to piece things together, piece the narrative of what really is going on together. And then, we collectively hold ourselves accountable to that. Like, one thing Ben is really great at is sort of leading like a pre-mortem, like, okay, we've done this, we've decided what we're going to do, and it's gone horribly wrong. Like, what has happened? How did we get there? And sort of being able to anticipate that. And then also just assessing, like there was an alternate feed program that we implemented this winter, and within 2 weeks we were like, yep, this isn't working. This isn't meeting our goals or our objectives for implementing this. And it was never about like, well, that was this person's idea, and like now they feel slighted. That doesn't happen here at all. And I know that sounds, kind of like, why are we talking about all these microaggressions or like these kind of this social minutia when we're talking about this? But I think that is really kind of the meat and potatoes of how to do this. Or how to muscle through parts of this that are challenging. You can go to as many pasture walks as you want and read as many books as you want, but it's going to be challenging. And you kind of have to have that social wherewithal as a team to be like, this is why we're doing this. It does absolutely suck right now. And here's how we're going to figure this out together.
Right. Well, and then back to that, if somebody brings an idea and we decide to go through with it and the idea fails, nobody points the finger at the person who brought it, because we was the pronoun. Yeah. We decided to go through with it. It was a team decision. And I think that's back to the article, the blog post, whatever it's called, is, you early on, you said when I came back to Wolfe's Neck after having been gone for a year, there was a palpable difference that you were trying to put your finger on. And you said that it probably was the posters all over the office walls, the decision-making flow charts and all the different things that were in there. And I guess, can you kind of elaborate on that and give some more perspective on the role that some of that culture making played in the success of this thus far journey? We're not going to say we've arrived, but the journey that you've been on.
Yeah. Also, Clay, if you can think of a better word than journey. Like process sounds kind of sterile. It is a process. Journey sounds like, I don't know. To me, journey does sort of imply like, Odysseus comes home, right? Yeah. Like there is something that ends. But yeah, so anyway, that's something that's a word I'm trying to find, and maybe you can think of it. But yeah, so like the giant Post-it note boards that you can buy and draw on, those are just plastic all over the walls of the office. And, the kind of the area where we house all of our data and records. And I don't know, I think in that process, we use that tool a lot in our meetings. And sometimes it's just like, let's write down some agenda items. But I think it's something that feels kind of shared. This is not like one person presenting their PowerPoint, not that we ever really do that, but like this is not just one person presenting a preset thing to a group of people in terms of like, I've decided exactly what the answer is. It's sort of, it offers a platform or a space for like more collective brainstorming. It's a more shared process. It's a more creative process. And it's sort of the visual diagram or history of how our meetings go. And then to be able to have that record in a place that's public, it's not on some computer that only the two managers can access. It's something that anybody can reference at any point in time. Getting back to your question of buy-in, like I think that is kind of how that is created, is everybody feels like there's a certain level of humility in those meetings. Everybody feels like everybody's perspective is valid. I think that's also, in having that visual reminder every day of like, that's what we're doing. Like there's our, it's not just useful, like that's our decision-making chart, but like, oh yeah, we all had input in that and we're going to like, maybe revisit that in 6 months. Like that's not necessarily something that's been handed down to us as a mandate or set in stone. But yeah, I felt kind of funny writing that piece of the article. I wasn't sure if it would translate or if people would even know what I meant by that. But it's interesting to me how that physical change really does reflect a social one. And I think it continues to feed it.
Yeah. I've always said that you're not in a holistic management seminar unless there's a flip chart somewhere in the room. And so
that's what it is. It's a flip chart.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's, and I've thought about that too. I'm like, is what I'm talking about really just like holistic management? I mean, Ben talks about holistic management. We don't use the testing questions Wolfe Snack does have a holistic context and a holistic goal. And again, Ben has definitely been a leader in that space and driving that. But I mean, it's not like we're going through decisions with the 7 questions every week. But in some ways, that really kind of feels like what we're doing in a way that, is just kind of more organic or natural.
Yeah. I think if you're creating the space and if everybody feels like their opinion is valid and everybody feels like they have the freedom to just raise their hand and say, okay, gut check time, this doesn't feel right. Whether you actually have the 7 testing questions in front of you or not, you're probably working through them on some level, just because it's a natural, outflow of living in this world that as God created it, I guess, is from my perspective. So I think that's probably part of it. Yeah. I appreciate this conversation very much. And I told you when we started that these 2 directions we could go probably didn't need to be 2 episodes, but we've basically taken the hour on this one part of the discussion. But if you wanted to give just a brief synopsis of your perspective, kind of zoom out from Wolfe's Neck and lay it into the landscape of the other experiences you've had and talk about this transition that they've been through and maybe the transition that the food system as a whole is experiencing on some level. I think that might kind of help also settle this conversation into a bigger picture too, because we've dealt with a lot of granular detail today.
My perspective is formed by 2 kind of parallel experiences. One that has been happening for much longer. So at this point, I've worked on 9 dairies in 5 states. And that, even though that's a more boots on the ground perspective, that diversity of geographies, business models, age demographics, whatever, I think the personal life component of farming and what people are dealing with beyond the barn is just as influential in how decisions are made on farm as anything else. But anyway, having seen that, and then that really started when I was in my late teens and continues today. But then, there was a period of time when I was working in food and agribusiness in parallel with my apprenticeships, really during COVID. So I started in late 2019 and I wrapped up my role at General Mills in late 2022. I think it was September 30th of 2022. And so, the reason why I decided to pursue that work, I had never thought I would go and do that. I, from a pretty young age, have been dedicated to being, a dairy grazer and someone on the ground doing tangible work. And one of my apprenticeships, I was attending quite a few pasture walks that were hosted by Organic Valley and Maple Hill. And these were grass-fed farms that were on the grass-fed truck in areas like Pennsylvania and New York. So not somewhere in the far corner of the country where the supply chain is complicated, I'll say. But like in big dairy state, like there are processing plants and there are routes and there are other farms doing this. I think both co-ops hosted pasture walks on dairies with like, I would say great fanfare and great expense towards bringing in expertise, whether that is like world-renowned nutritionist or veterinarian. And it was just, in some ways as a young person who wanted to go into grass-fed dairying, so exciting, or maybe promising is the wrong word, but like optimistic to see like, wow, these larger dairy co-ops really see are starting to see the value in what we're doing, and they're investing in that. Like there seems to be this new value equation that is emerging and that might yet be untapped from all of the different ecological benefits that come out of grass-based dairying, in addition to the commodity that leaves the farm. But at those same pasture walks, a lot of producers were approaching regional pool managers and asking questions like, my neighbor just lost their contract. Does that mean my whole route is jeopardized? Like there was so much anxiety about, contract security. And, lo and behold, well, I guess it was 2 or 3 years later, there was significant pullout throughout Vermont and New York and other parts of the Northeast. And there continues to be. But anyway, I decided, I was like, clearly there is something here that food and agribusiness wants. Like you are sending a top veterinarian, to like a 30 cow Jersey dairy in the middle of nowhere in New York. Like, what are you trying to get out of this? It must be meaningful, but I don't understand what it is. And I, of course, couldn't even have a conversation with the folks there who were from, the corporate side of those co-ops, because I wasn't conversant in the vernacular of supply chain or food business. And I just felt so ignorant. And so I made the really hard decision to pause my apprenticeship and go pursue that. And I ended up working in supply chain at General Mills for a couple of years. And then concurrently, I was also working on their regenerative agriculture pilots. And then eventually I moved into that role full time. But yeah, I was really trying to understand, like, is there a way to make this way of farming more viable, financially viable for people like myself? Is there a way for young farmers to be rewarded meaningfully, not just for the commodity that leaves, but for other goods or services that are produced, like, whether that's, and now I feel like this is such a loaded word, but whether that's a carbon inset program or water quality program or, something like that. And I think the big takeaway that I have had is that for all of the funding that is flying around, fueling these efforts to pilot things and do research, and I mean, it sounds like, we're just making leaps and bounds, and in some ways we are, but in many ways we're really far from being able to reliably measure and quantify and commodify, if that's even the right word. Maybe we don't want to do that. Some of the beneficial outcomes that come from pasture-based livestock farming or any other enterprise. I mean, it's scientifically complicated, it's economically complicated, and in kind of this arms race between companies to figure out how to hack this, I am very worried that the security of farm data is going to be compromised, or even if it's not, that the system that emerges, whether by design or otherwise, doesn't reward producers in the way that is the most fair, or the most fair for everybody. So, for example, I mean, I worked with a lot of producers, or farmers, I should say, who were, they were small grain farmers, and they were really early adopters of some of these practices that we talk about when we talk about regenerative agriculture. And it was just really hard to quantify like what kind of benefit had accrued from that ecologically, because it's not like we had a baseline when they had like, 1.5% organic matter. I mean, it was already through the roof. And it just, that's just one of many things, many questions that I think the industry is trying to understand. And maybe, Clay, I mean, maybe it's just like anything else. I think you said this recently, like, I think meaningful change has to happen really slowly. And maybe the fact that it is happening, maybe the fact that it feels like we're so far away from that shouldn't be, something that is disappointing. I think I would like the industry to understand that it should be slow. If we're really going to consider all the stakeholders at the table and what we really need to accomplish that fairly, it's not something that's going to happen overnight or with, billions of dollars in USDA grant funding.
Well, no, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. What you're talking about is, in large part, is the issue of additionality. Like, on some level, the guy who's been no-tilling and everything else, integrating livestock and all that stuff for 30 years is incentivized to go till it up.
Yeah.
And then establish his baseline and then go back to doing all those things. And, so we know that's not right. And I think a lot of the guys I know aren't motivated by that anyways. It becomes more of a personal challenge of how good can we get this? Like you said, we're not going to just say, okay, we've arrived, we're done. There's always more opportunity to tweak and make improvements. And when we start to look outside of our own fence rows and start to examine the other, the social implications and the environmental implications, then you keep adding layers to those things of how good can this be and how much better can we make it for all parties impacted. And so I don't think there is going to be I don't think the good solution will be the quick one, like you said, so I think that I would agree with that for sure.
I feel like there have been a couple of times where I've kind of done a 180 or a 360 actually in my understanding of this. Like, I remember as somebody who was totally new to dairy, I was like, organic is like the gold standard of responsible, of good management. And then as I started to work on dairies that were trying to transition to organic or trying to transition to grass-fed, and they were struggling with that transition, I was like, I don't know if this works actually. I mean, is it worth cutting back on, grain or the nutritional program if everybody calves in with the retained placenta and then gets ketosis and DA? Like, what are we doing here? Like, we're so focused on the practices, we're not thinking about the outcomes. And by the time I paused my apprenticeship the first time and entered corporate America, I was like, I want to talk about an outcomes-based approach to agriculture. And at the time, that was kind of pretty sexy and still gaining a lot of traction. And I think we're collectively coming back around to like, well, it's also kind of both. Like, the practices also matter. Like, the intent behind what we're doing matters. And I think another trend that I saw starting to emerge was that as organizations are collecting data on what farms are doing and what outcomes they're generating, it's almost like there is a desire to pinpoint what the ideal farm looks like and does to generate, what are the exact practices to generate these exact outcomes. And that's another way that I really fear that data is going to be leveraged against producers, because I fear that conclusions will be drawn prematurely about what practices generate which outcomes and in what context they work, and then there will be this narrowed understanding of what needs to happen on the ground for producers to be ecologically and financially successful because of the urgency around the promises that corporations have made around these goals. I mean, a lot of corporations have a 2030 goal, and a lot of them have a 2050 goal. 2030 is basically tomorrow. And so that's just another fear that I have. And I know there are a lot of good folks working on these questions and like wrestling with them every day. But yeah, it weighs, heavily on my mind when I think about what does the world look like when where farms can feel comfortable collaborating with all kinds of organizations, for-profits, nonprofits, government agencies on these kinds of things. And yeah, I think that's something that just kind of remains unclear, or that is not really tightly managed right now. At least as I've been able to experience it in the limited time that I've had to do that.
Can you give me an example of what you mean by insecure farm data and some of those things?
Let's say there is a dairy co-op that is working with a company that buys their fluid milk, and there's sort of a collaboration around supporting farmers through some sort of, whether you call it sustainable or regenerative, some sort of changes implemented on farm, and then the tracking of that data to model like, oh, okay, these changes were made based on, the suite of data that we're collecting about the whole farm. How are we going to model the benefits, or perhaps the lack thereof, of those changes? And I would be afraid that somebody like Dairy Co-op A is like, wow, our customer, I don't know, our customer who buys this milk, we have the ability to help them reach their goals if we can decrease our carbon footprint, or if we could claim insets in some way. And so I'm afraid that they then exert pressure on their producers prematurely. Like, we've determined that these practices, like this kind of methane digester or whatever it is, maybe it's technological, maybe it's more biological. If you guys just did this, then we would be of more valuable to this customer. Our market would be more secure, and then that is exerting pressure without really understanding the unique context of each farm. And so maybe it's not so much like get big or get out, but get green or get out, and get green in this very narrow way that we've understood it, with honestly not a lot of time to really understand it and research it. And like, that's kind of what I'm thinking about, especially because, and maybe that doesn't really, in terms of data sharing, in the situations I was in, it's not like everybody could see all of the data in the same ways. But what you could see was general trends, and like you, probably the dairy co-op could see the production data against the production value against like the environmental value. Whereas somebody like that customer that they are trying to collaborate with might only be able to see those general trends mapped against each other, but may not be able to identify individual farms. That's not really directly answering your question, I'm realizing as I'm answering this, but
I think it is. Honestly, I think it is, because there's that opening up of the possibility for the market, or for the co-op, to weaponize data to force farmers into a decision that they weren't ready to make, or weren't willing to make, maybe, or able to make, any and all of the above. And so, I think that's a good example, honestly. And I think that's part of, what I wanted, what I was hoping to understand better when I asked for an example. So I think you got it.
Yeah, I think that word is weaponized is a good word, or leverage. And sometimes it's like, you think, well, the dairy co-ops know what they're picking up. You almost think like that relationship should be safe, right? Like between the producer and their co-op, like what that maybe should be the most transparent. But, in some ways, like the customer that buys that milk is not going to the individual farm. Like in some circumstances, the more proximal the business relationship, the more jeopardy there is in sharing that information with that partner. Like, I don't want to say it would have been safer for the individual farms to share their data directly with the companies that they were partnering with and that were like, helping to fund these regenerative programs. But I don't know, maybe in some ways it would have been. And I don't know, Clay, if any of these outcomes any of these potentially negative outcomes that I'm talking about have actually occurred from that. I'm just worried about the risk given previous historical industry trends.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's happened here either, but I think you can point to some cases probably in other countries where something very similar has happened. Maybe not an exact analog in the dairy industry, but in other agricultural industries, I think you could probably find similar situations. So I don't think we'd have to look too hard. But anything else on your mind, or anything else that we missed here today that you were hoping to accomplish?
I think maybe just as a closing thing, so I'm someone who's still very young and very early career, and it is still my goal to operate my own grass-fed dairy herd somewhere here in New England. And I, have been so lucky to learn from so many different people who have offered, technical knowledge and career guidance in so many ways. And like for me, the grass-fed transition, or, maybe it's just farming in general, I think has shed more and more light on, like, as excited as I am, as I said earlier, about cows and grass and soil, like as you kind of try to launch yourself and do the hard thing, whatever that is, I think the other kind of holy trinity is like time, people, and cash flow. And the people part and the time part is not just like, how long does it take to like do calf chores, or, like how many labor units do you hire? It's like, who's in your life, and like who are you besides a dairy grazer? And like if you are going to have this as a profession and a career or a vocation, it's more than really any of those things. But like I guess for me, this concept of transition, whether it's in my work or my personal life, always highlights like what is really important. And I think it's important that we start talking to young people who want to be in agriculture about those things early in their career. Like, I think, I've seen too many marriages and relationships be really strained by something like this. I've seen too many intergenerational relationships be really challenged. I've seen like too many kids be really disappointed by their parents not being home because they have to treat a sick cow late, or like I've seen too many people give up other parts of their life, and not just in ways where it's like, just kind of part of the job, but like in ways that they have expressed really impacts them. And I've seen also a lot of like really talented young people like really start to career path in this space, not just in dairy, but like in grass-based dairy. And something very valid pulls them away is the wrong word, but they decide, and sometimes with great emotional difficulty, that they cannot make it work in a way that balances all parts of their life. And I don't think it's anybody's, I'm not saying that like, I think young people are deprived of anything. Like, I think this is a time where we've got more guidance and support and encouragement for young people to do this than ever. But like, how do we keep people doing this? I mean, I think that's the question that I and lots of people in their late 20s and early 30s kind of come up against. And I think it ties back into that thing of, those other things we talk about of time, people, and finances. And I think that's also kind of, for me, the appeal of this model is that it has some promise of having a well-rounded existence. And I'm just always, I don't know, maybe this is just a plug for your listeners or for you. Like, I'm always trying to think, like, how can I support myself or other people I work with, people who are maybe earlier in their career or people who are above me who I really want to stay. And I'm like, please don't go and like decide to be a vet tech or like work for extension. But maybe do. I mean, those are all very valid and our career paths evolve naturally, and that's not always a bad thing. But I don't know. That's just something that weighs heavily on my mind. Like, these transitions are hard. And I think there are moments when like you kind of have to put everything else on the back burner, but there are also moments when like the things on the back burner are kind of what you need the most. And that is kind of that's one thing that I think we're all trying to figure out. And I don't know, that's just something that is top of mind for me as I'm thinking about these kinds of challenges and how we approach them. But
yeah. Well, yeah, I think that there's two things that I think of there. First of all is education. We have to educate people to value those things rather than educating them to value production above all else. And I think that agriculture in America, from row crop to vegetable farming to beef to dairy to swine, hogs, everything has been production for the last, I don't know, 50, 60, maybe longer years. And we've got to start educating people to value, like you said, time, money, people, and managing for things that maximize those as metrics. And then I think that one of the things that might help in that is if we could stop looking at our neighbors as competition and start looking at our neighbors as collaborators and say, okay, maybe between the two of us, we're going to employ another labor unit or two, and that will enable each of us to leave for a week on vacation every year, or 2 weeks every year, 1 week in the summer, 1 week in the winter, whatever, especially on dairies where everybody talks, the trope about being married to the dairy, basically. And I think that if we would look at people as this is somebody that can come over and fill the gap on my place so that I can get away, is maybe a way that we need to start looking at it, rather than he sent more pounds today than I did, or vice versa.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that suggestion. I think Mary Jo had a podcast episode about something similar recently, and it's a really meaningful idea. But yeah, I guess on that note, I really appreciate that, there are voices like yours and like your podcast sharing these ideas, because, sometimes it's a really challenging day and you get in the parlor and you're like, can't believe I have 3 or 4 hours and I have to milk everybody, and it's just like a mess. And and then, remembering that there is a broader community asking the same questions is, I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but, it is a really meaningful resource. So yeah, well, I've really talked your ear off, and I've exhausted myself. And so I won't take up any more of your time. But I just want to say again, thank you. Thank you for having me on and for kind of taking a chance on me and thinking that I'm somebody who might be willing to listen to. But yeah, I really enjoy your work and the people you interview. And I don't think there's a podcast that I am as consistently like, yes, like this person, like that is Mary Jo, Marissa Tolsma, love Marissa Tolsma. Like, I've followed her for a long time. Burke Teichert, I'm like, yes, I think your content is really meaningful. And I feel like there's a lot of noise in this space in the podcast world. And I think a lot of it is just kind of tiring and spinning on the same ideas. But I really don't find that to be the case with Working Cows. And yeah, I just wanted to say that and say that I really appreciate it.
Well, I thank you so much, and I appreciate your thoughtful answers today, and really appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation. So thank you.
Yeah.
Very good stuff there with Kate. Really appreciate her perspective and her thoughtful answers. So very much appreciate that. Looking forward to next week on the Working Cows podcast. Had a friend of mine reach out to me and say, hey, I'm working for Representative Harriet Hageman, and she would love to have the opportunity to share with you and your listeners some of what she's been working on. And so we're going to talk to Representative Harriet Hageman of Wyoming next week on the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.